Hello, friends, and thanks for listening to the Capital City Soccer Show, your independent source for everything Austin FC. On today's show, we're going to talk about the addition of Matt Besler to the team, and we're also going to talk a little bit about the ever-crowded senior roster and how many spots we actually have left on that senior roster. We also have an interview with the one and only Alexi Lalas, who discussed with us his views on the state of Austin FC as well as kind of the state of MLS in general. My name is Landon Cottam. I'm joined as always by Mr. Jeremiah Bentley.
Hey everybody, I'm Jeremiah Bentley. Landon, we had a very unique occurrence in Austin today in that it snowed pretty much all day long. Did you guys get out in it?
Yeah, we took one little walk out in the snow, and because it rained first, it was very wet on the ground, and so we took our dog with us, and by the end of it, he was soaked and shivering, and so we didn't stay out in it very long, but we did walk by our neighbor's house who had built these beautiful snowmen and took pictures with their snowmen. So we got the snowman picture, but didn't actually have to build one.
Have to do the work. I like that. So this morning we did that a little bit. We took the dog out and he really hated it because it was super wet, but then it kept snowing and kept snowing. So at first we built this tiny little snowman that was maybe a 4-inch tall snowman. And then it kept snowing. We built a 2-foot snowman. And then eventually we went to the park by the school where the kids go to school with a bunch of the neighbor kids and built a real life-size, the first real life-size snowman I've ever built in my life. So that was a pretty cool experience, for the day. That kept going on, and it was a very unique Austin thing. And I saw that I think the Stewards, you're recently in from New York City. We're not super excited about that weather today, but it was great for us.
Yeah. So, did you get snow growing up? Is it Era? Is that what your town is called?
It's a long E. Era.
Era.
I don't know why, but it was north of Dallas Fort Worth, so it was probably twice a year. It was just about right. You could get 1 or 2 good snows a year, and then you'd have to deal with it all the time. But for the boys, this was a very unique experience. And you're further north, right? So you got
up in the Panhandle, we would get it several times a year, and sometimes even into I remember spring breaks in March where we had snow on the ground sometimes randomly. So it was a regular occurrence, but it didn't always stick for very long. And so a good snowman snow wasn't a regular occurrence. So I'm still pretty excited about it when it happens.
Yeah, one of my weirdest work experiences was one of those. We had an office in Lubbock. We have an office in Lubbock, and we flew into Lubbock, and we got one of those spring break snows. And we couldn't get out, and we were stuck for 11 hours in the Lubbock airport. And there's not a lot. There's one bar in the Lubbock airport, and there's a bunch of insurance company executives overwhelming that bar. And that plane was a mess. It was a good thing I was taking a cab home because we drank for 12 hours straight because there's nothing else to do.
It's it's not an interesting airport to be in either, and you can walk from one end to the other in 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot to it. So so that's the what is it? It's an international airport too, right? Was it the Dolph Briscoe International?
Preston somebody international airport that I guarantee, I don't know this for a fact, but I guarantee it doesn't fly anywhere internationally.
But it could. I think that's
theoretically they could fly to another country if they really wanted to. All right, let's jump into some Matt Besler talk. How about that? Austin FC signed Matt Besler last week. He's a free agent from Kansas City. Jeremiah, I think you have a little some biographical information prepared.
Yeah, and if you remember the last show, we knew that Austin was going to announce a guy basically at the same time the show came out, and that guy was Matt Besler. So, yeah, he played 12 seasons in Sporting Kansas City. Was a central defender. Won an MLS championship in 2013. 3 Lamar Hunt U.S. Open Cup titles, 5 MLS All-Stars, latest one being in 2016. And I think we'll talk a little bit about this because you watched some video today. He started 337 appearances across all competitions, played with the national team, which I think people are pretty familiar with. So, he's got a ton of experience and credentials. The thing being, he will be 34 by the time the season starts. And so you watched, I think you went back and watched some video from him kind of early on and then maybe some more recent video of him. And can you talk about what he was as a player then and maybe what he is as a player now and what we can all expect?
Yeah, so I think in short, he's the same player he's always been, just a little bit slower. Um, so, but as I get into this, I'm not so concerned about the speed as much. So, typically, like in a center back pairing, not always, but a lot of times you'll have like your destroyer, kind of like your guy who's going to be aggressive and go out and win the ball early and kind of attack the ball. And you'll have another guy who will sit deep, and that one will be kind of the one who's organizing that back line, kind of the leader of that back line. Besler is definitely the second one. He's not not the fastest, not the strongest, and he's never been the fastest. And like I said, he's lost a step, but he's never been the fastest guy. He's a very smart player, and so really organized, really aware, just a quick mind on the field. And so one-on-one defending, he's really clever. So he's not usually not gonna like out athlete you, but he's one of those guys that will have really good positioning and at the right moment sticks that foot in and pokes the ball away. He's also really smooth and like safe on the ball. So whenever the ball is at his feet, you really trust that he's going to make the right pass, or like a good, like he's not just a safe passer, but a pretty good passer. And then also just when he's carrying the ball, he looks natural. Like there's like center backs that don't always look natural with the ball at their feet, and he looks like he's very comfortable with it and is pretty good at it. So I think those are some of his strengths. He is he's the center back that you want in this kind of system. Wolf talks about a possession based system. We're going to attack. He's got all the skills to do that thing. My only concern is his age, like you mentioned. So we just don't really know if at 34, if he's still going to be that same player. I looked at his minutes. So his minutes in 2020, he didn't play that much, but looking back, I don't think many of those games were because he just got benched. I know he had a hamstring injury and then had a concussion at the end of the season. And so I watched some of his games from just clips from his games last year. He still looked good. So I think he's still a very quality player, and he's not, he doesn't seem to be injury prone either. So I was kind of worried, like, oh, he missed a lot of last season with injuries. But like I said, it was a hamstring, and it doesn't look like he's had a lot of hamstring injuries. So he's not Christian Pulisic where he hurts his hamstring every 2 weeks. He's had like a handful of little injuries here and there, but overall he's been pretty healthy over his career. And then the concussion is just kind of like a freak thing as well. So I think as long as he can stay fit, and I think he's got potential to be really good. And one thing I wanted to bring up as far as something he's going to bring to this team, and I think some people have kind of discounted, is what he'll bring to the culture of the team. And so he's one of these players that he's works really hard. He's really good at kind of bringing that team together, being a leader in the locker room, a leader on the field. And I listened to Greg Vanney on Extra Time the other day. He was just hired as LA Galaxy's coach, and they had him on, and they asked him, like, what does that mean to you? People talk about building a culture at a team. What does that mean? And essentially he's saying it's what you do every day as a team, not just what you do in those 90 minutes, but what you do every day, making, and he mentioned Michael Bradley, who was the leader of his team in Toronto for a long time. First to show up, last to leave, being a leader in every aspect of the game, in that day-to-day work, and then also on the field during the 90 minutes. Besler's that kind of guy. And so when you're talking about building that culture at a new team, something that you could arguably say like Miami, a new team this year, didn't do. Looking at their roster, they have a pretty good team on paper, but they just never were able to put it all together. Guys like Besler, guys like Alex Ring, even guys like Hector Jimenez and Brad Stuver. Ring is clearly a talent. These other three are kind of question marks, but I think they're all going to bring that kind of that X factor that's going to help you build that culture in the locker room. And maybe that culture isn't going to lead immediately or directly to wins in season one. But when you talk about building that base to build a team on top of, I think a guy like Matt Besler is going to bring that in spades and is going to be really valuable to that part of the team.
Yeah, and one of the things that maybe we talked about on Twitter or somewhere is what Alex Ring brings to the ability, like having such a nailed on central defensive midfielder that can sort of stand in front of that back line, that maybe, he can cover for some of the just physical deficiencies that Besler might have, because you've got such a strong position with your central defensive mid, and then between the two other backs, you've got a little bit of that bruiser thing that sort of together, when you look at that system together, and that's a beautiful thing about being able to construct this roster sort of holistically, is all the pieces can be greater than the individual parts.
And the rest of the back line is pretty athletic. So Lima moves well. I think I don't really know how fast Ben Sweat is, but I think he's pretty sound defensively anyway. And then the other two center backs, whichever of them ends up being the starter, both of them move really well. And so I think Besler is smart enough and knows that he's lost a step and will more times than not be in the right position. And then also just kind of teaching those other guys, like a guy like Romagna, 22 years old, new to the league, having a veteran like Besler standing next to you is going to be just it's going to be really great for those younger players playing next to someone like that as well. And Besler's not going to be able to play every game. I saw an interview last year where he mentioned that he's not going to play every game. Just he's at that age where it's not going to happen. And so I think when he's fit, he'll start, and sometimes when he needs a rest, he'll still be there to kind of be that leader in training and then on the bench.
Yeah, I know you want to talk a little bit about salary and where you looked up some comps, but before we do that, I think we would be remiss to not talk about his intro video, which was the most unique.
Oh yeah,
is the greatest. So for those of you that haven't seen it on Twitter, he basically does a minute-long Matthew McConaughey impression. It's like
a Lincoln commercial.
Yeah, it's like a spoof of all those Lincoln commercials, except it's him in a Ford truck. And I would highly encourage you to watch that, including, I believe it ends with "all right, all right, all right," or if it doesn't end with it, it's in there somewhere. But it made for an exciting announcement for sure.
I was watching it, in the first 15 seconds, I was like, "Oh, this is kind of dumb," and then 5 to 10 seconds later, I was like, all right, this is pretty good.
Well, it's because he sold it. He could have done a half, he could have done kind of a half job, and you'd be like, oh, I see what he's doing. But he really leaned into the character.
I showed it to Ashley, my wife, and she pointed out this one moment that I think really she was like, this part tipped it over the edge to making it really good. And he says or you can get in your truck and drive and keep moving forward or something like that. And then it cuts to him and he does this little finger gun point forward. And that little finger point, I was like, oh, that was perfect. That was really good.
Yeah, that's good. Why don't you talk about the research that you did around how much we can expect to pay him, maybe compared to other similar situations?
Yeah, so I went and looked at free agents, players who were free agents after the 2017 and 2018 seasons. And then because we have access to their salaries from those years, right? We don't have information about 2020 salaries. And so that would have been useful, but we do have access to 2017, 2018, and 2019 salaries from the MLS Players Association releasing those. So I was just looking for players who are kind of similar profiles as far as age and notoriety goes, and seeing what the difference in their salaries were a year after being a free agent. And so if you look at players like Ozzy Alonso, Benny Failharbour, Michael Parkhurst, they all took pay cuts, some of them bigger pay cuts than others. Someone like Benny Failharbour, I think Benny Failharbour, his salary decreased 26% the year that I guess it was between LAFC and Colorado. Ozzy Alonso dropped 40%, but he was a designated player in Seattle, and when he went to Minnesota was just barely a TAM player, and so that's why the big drop was there. Michael Parkhurst, I think, is a pretty good comparison. Michael Parkhurst he wasn't on big money anyway, but he was 35 that year. He took a 12% pay cut. And so all that to be said, another one that I thought was just kind of a fun one to throw in there is Breck Shea. He was on $745,000 in 2018 at Vancouver, and then signed with Atlanta for the 2019 season for a 70% decrease of his salary at $225,000. His stock dropped, to say the least. But yeah, looking at what Besler's salary might be. So 2019, he was making $783,250. So $780,000 just to kind of round it down. If we did, I would guess somewhere between like a 15 to 30% pay cut, just based on his age and the fact that he was a free agent and like Kansas City wasn't going to sign him again. So if we did a 20% decrease, it would be $626,600. That would put him in the TAM space. We're definitely not going to make him a designated player. So I would guess it's going to be somewhere around $600,000, like just under that maximum salary charge. So we're probably not using TAM on him. So it's expensive, but it's not crazy. And for someone, that you kind of know what you're getting in a lot of ways. So it's a lot of money for someone that age, but it's also a lot of experience that you're getting for that money. So how does that strike you, Jeremiah? What does that number sound like?
I mean, I think the big thing with that number is he's your guy, right? I mean, you're not going to sign two center backs, in that amount of money. Like, you're expecting him to be a leader, on the field. And I think for people that might be a little bit disappointed by it, I think that's a really good indication that, for all the reasons that you've talked about, leadership and things like that, that he is our big name center back signing. And I think there's all the thought in the world that he'll live up to it, but it's definitely a challenge. But it fits with what they've done too. I mean, we really have looked heavily at MLS experience in terms of the people that we've heavily invested in, and people understand the league, have been in the league in a while, and sort of work in that system. And he seems like another one that does that.
Yeah, and we talked about FC Cincinnati when we were leading up to the expansion draft, and they got like, I think it was 4 or 5 guys during that period of time that were all on like $400,000 or $500,000. We didn't really do that. Like, the guys that we're paying that much are guys who, like, we know what they are. It's like Nick Lima, Alex Ring, like the guys from within MLS anyway. Like Cecilio, we think he's going to be good, but he's not played in the league yet, so we don't know. But the guys within the league that we're paying well, we know what we're getting. So I think if you can afford to pay several guys like decently like that, if
you're not speculating, right? Yeah,
you're not speculating, and then a lot of the other guys we're got pretty cheap. Like a lot of the like just to bulk up the roster, those guys we got pretty cheap, and so we still have quite a bit of money to work with. And so it may sound high for a 34-year-old, but I think in the context of the full roster build, it's not that bad.
Yeah, let's talk about the roster build, and I think a good setup for that is another video. So Adrian Healy released his. Wait, was it a video? Yeah, it was a video. He talked. Yeah. He talked through kind of who we had, and I think we probably overanalyzed any name that he referenced in it. And so he talked about the keepers sort of collectively, and didn't. I think he talked about Tarbell being the favorite, but didn't really, say that he was the out-and-out starter. Talked about the back line. Talked about Ring. Did not mention another midfielder, if I remember right. Is that correct?
No, he mentioned Alex Ring, not as like he does mention some later in the video, but as far as like the core pieces of the team, I mean, unless you're counting Fagundes, he mentions Fagundes and Cecilio after that. But as far as like in the central midfield, it's Ring, which is true. He's really the only central midfielder we have on the team right now.
Yeah, but it's interesting to think about that. So he ends up talking about, I think, 8 or 9 different players as starters, which I would believe that's where we can expect the DPs to come. But from among the people he didn't talk about, what did you think about the fact that Stroud and Gallagher were like the two, lesser known players that sort of got specific call outs from Adrian?
Yeah, I think those two are like you like try to see if you can read anything into these like a video like this, and I liked how candid it was, where he was like, and it's probably true. Like, yeah, we've got these three keepers. We don't know who the starter is, which is probably the case. It's not like Josh is keeping a secret who our starting goalkeeper is going to be. Like, yeah, it's probably Tarbell, but they'll get into camp and we'll find that out. But it gives, I think one thing that is interesting is they kind of mentioned Fagundes in that, like those key starter guys, which I think it means that they're hoping for him to be, if not a starter, then a regular contributor and like in that starting rotation. But yeah, they mentioned Stroud and Gallagher. I think those two guys they're guys who did contribute in this last season for their teams, kind of out of nowhere. Like they were very low salary players. Both Stroud was with Red Bull 2 the previous season, just got signed to the first team contract this year. And then Gallagher was like on loan and played with Atlanta too, and then came in and had a really good season for Atlanta. So I think they're two guys that that people may not know their names, but I think they will. They're going to get chances, and I think they do both have a chance to kind of make an impact. So I thought it was interesting that he brought them up, and I don't think that means those guys are going to start. I think it means that they're going to get chances, and that we expect them to, at least one of them to maybe make an impact on the team.
Yeah, and those two guys were guys that one might think would possibly be supplemental roster players, but one would think, but they aren't, because apparently one of the things about the expansion draft is anybody you take in the expansion draft has to be on the senior roster. So how many players do you think we have on the senior roster, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so we get 20 players. We have 20 spots for the senior roster. We have 17 players right now, and it's very likely that all 17 of our players right now will be on that senior roster, which is a little bit scary, right? Like we're saying like, okay, we have 7 or 8 starters right now, and we only have 3 senior spots to fill in the rest of those starters and like our bench. That's a little bit unnerving. So you look at someone like Gallagher, actually. So Stroud was taken in the expansion draft, so he would have to be. He has to have a senior spot. Gallagher was actually traded.
Oh, that's right.
We traded Gam for him. So depending on what his salary is, if he's like on minimum salary, we could put him in a supplemental spot. But if he's making more than that, we don't really know what he's making, and so I'd say there's a good chance that he's going to be on the senior roster. Another one that we looked at is Brad Stuver. He was on $100,000 last year, which would put him on the senior roster. If he's for some reason took a pay cut and is making like senior minimum, he could be in a supplemental spot. But I think there's a very good chance that all 17 of these players are going to be on the senior roster, which means we have 3 spots to fill. One thing to keep in mind is the super draft is coming up, and more than likely all the players we take in the super draft are going to be in that supplemental roster. So those are players who could contribute and even be make regular appearances on the field, but would be in supplemental spots. But it's an interesting thing to look at with how few spots, and not to mention we have, is it 4 or 5 international spots?
Yeah, it'd be 5 still, right? International spots?
Yeah, we still have 5. It's the 3 Guarani guys that have taken the international spots. So we have 5 international spots left, 3 senior roster spots. And so that'll be an interesting thing to keep an eye on, is like, what are we going to do with those? Nashville has sold 1 or 2 of their international spots for pretty good money. So I don't know if that's something that we'll be interested in doing, but someone pointed out, I think it was it Trey Bushy in Slack the other day, pointing out that a lot of the players available in the super draft are actually international players. And so maybe we'd be giving an international spot to one of these players on the supplemental roster because they've been going to school here. That might be kind of a faster track to a green card for them as well, which means they wouldn't take up that international spot for very long if we could get them on the path to a green card. But yeah, just kind of that part of the roster build is going to be interesting to watch over the next few weeks for sure.
Yeah, that part seems like a little bit of a squeeze. Yeah, I looked around, and I think teams have between like 6 and maybe 10 international spots, depending upon like on the rest of the league, depending upon who had either acquired or traded spots. But I mean, there's a plan. It's all coming together, right? Context is the word we keep using.
We hope.
And that's it. Yeah, Scott was the guy I was trying to think of that would seem like he would normally be like a supplemental roster player, but because he was selected in the expansion draft, would have to be would occupy a senior spot.
Exactly. Yeah, and he's someone that you think probably will be making league minimum or close to it. But yeah, he has to have a senior spot because we took him in that draft. So that we'll keep an eye on it and let you all know whenever we know more. But let's talk about the season opening a little bit. So we talked about this on the last show, but on Allocation Disorder, the newest episode, Paul and Sam talked about the possibility of training camps getting delayed and kind of how the renegotiating of the CBA might affect that. So they essentially said if camp gets delayed and there's also CBA talks going on, these players probably aren't going to want to go be working and being in training camp while they're also negotiating the collective bargaining agreement. So depending on how all that shakes out, it could kind of throw a kink in preseason plans.
Yeah, I can imagine they're not going to be really excited about hanging out and training and possibly getting injured, right? I mean, it's a job, right? It's their business, and if they had some security, I'm sure they would be a little more lenient. But if they're in that negotiation, they're probably not going to be. The other thing, I think this was in an article on The Athletic, is the clubs overall seem to be generally in the dark about the start of the league, and including front office types. One of the things that I thought was interesting about why the league would maybe start on time is if the pandemic response continues to be bad and the COVID rollout is slow and stadiums aren't going to open until late summer anyhow, then the league feels like they might as well just go ahead and get it started. Like there's no advantage to waiting for the starting date if they're not going to be open with full stadiums, which is the first
empty stadiums in the spring or empty stadiums in the summer. What's the difference?
Yeah, exactly. So I think we don't know what this all means, but I think we can sum it up is that it would be a surprise if the season did start in early March.
Yeah, and that means like the other question is, so right as of right now, what we heard is that preseason camp is supposed to start at the end of January. And I think it was Peter Vermes said in an interview the other day that Kansas City is planning on starting February 1st. And so like they're planning, and apparently he's told his players that they're planning to be there February 1st. If the season gets pushed back, does that mean preseason camp gets pushed back as well? Like, would they just have an extra long preseason camp, or would they tell the players to take a little bit of a rest? I don't know what that would look like either. So as has been the case for the last year, everything's kind of up in the air, and we'll just have to see how it shakes out.
Yep. Yeah, I think so. So I think this is a good spot to maybe set up our interview.
Yeah, we'll take a quick little break, and then we're gonna come back with Alexi Lalas. So Alexi, he was the MC at the Austin FC franchise announcement, and then we actually interviewed him last year on the Austin Anthem podcast for the 1-year anniversary, and so we thought it'd be nice to have him on again for the 2-year anniversary and just kind of see what his thoughts were on Austin FC, how they've changed over the last year, and kind of how he sees the direction of the club going. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Alexi Lalas. The Capital City Soccer Show is brought to you by, you guessed it, our friends at FVF Law, the official injury lawyers of Austin FC.
FVF is a different kind of personal injury law firm. They're dedicated to community, transparency, and client education.
You can find out more about what makes FVF different and why understanding your legal options can dramatically change the outcomes of a case at fvf.law. That's fvf.law. I ain't got no time to let you pass. I only got one life. All right, we are joined by the one and only Alexi Lalas. Alexi, thanks for joining us, man.
Good evening, gentlemen. I'm coming to you from Los Angeles here. I hope you and yours are staying safe and sane as we head into 2021, which hopefully, good things or better things on and off the field for everybody out there.
Yeah, it's a little bit apocalyptic in Austin today in the fact that it's been snowing all day. We got like several inches of snow today.
Now, is Austin a place, and I know I've been there and I've visited, but I certainly don't have the background that you do. Is that a place there where all hell breaks loose when something like that happens because of the rarity?
Absolutely, yeah. It never happens. So
okay.
People go crazy, but there's lots of snowmen on my Twitter and Instagram feeds today. So it was a much happier place on the internet than it has been for the last week or so.
I have kids. I have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, and they're Southern California kids, and so they have this fascination with snow and the cold, and they romanticize it. And I try to explain them. My wife and we grew up in Michigan, and so I try to explain that the snow is all great when it first comes down, and it's fun and it's beautiful and it's clean, and you can make snowmen and do all that kind of stuff. And then about 3 months in, when you haven't seen the sun for any length of period, it gets real old really, really fast. But they still romanticize it and will until they actually get to a place where they are living day to day when it comes to snow. But Austin's not like that.
No, we're good. So mine are 11 and 9, and we had talked about taking them. They wanted to see real snow, and so we had talked about going to Colorado or New Mexico or something. And after 2 hours of snow today, they're like, "Daddy, never mind, we're good. Like this is exactly all the snow we need in our lives. Let's get warm."
All right, so Alexi, you hosted the Austin FC franchise announcement, and so we're approaching the 2-year anniversary of that. We interviewed you a year ago on the Austin Anthem podcast, which was the podcast that Jeremiah and I were hosting at that point in time. So approaching the 2-year mark, we wanted to get you on again and get your thoughts on all the things that have changed and kind of your thoughts and opinions on Austin FC in the last year. So let's just, going back to that announcement, are there any particular memories that you have from that day that have kind of stuck with you?
The unique part of it, I've done a bunch of announcements and these celebrations, if you will, over the years, and for different clubs, big and small, and each one takes on its own life and its own characteristic of the culture and of the the people that are there. And this one was really unique in the way that it came down, obviously in the setting. I thought, not being incredibly having an incredible background when it comes to what Austin is. I thought that, at least from my perspective as an outsider coming in, it did a lot to maintain and to pay tribute to what Austin has been, is, and is going to be in the way that they did it. I remember talking to Don Garber after it, and he said that was unlike anything. And he's done a whole lot more than I have, certainly. And so just the unique aspect of it, and the celebration, the excitement, the cooperation, and the understanding that this was going to be something that was your own, but it also was going to be something that you didn't necessarily have to be a huge soccer fan to enjoy and come to appreciate. And the branding and the excitement about what was to come, and the infrastructure that now we've seen a couple of years on that's come, all of those different things. But at the time, I think it was just an energy and a real positive and cautiously optimistic type of view, both from internally and everybody that was there, and those of us externally that were coming in.
Yeah, I just looked down at this and it reminded me of this, but I have a funny little memento of that day. I was standing on like kind of the front row playing a drum during the announcement, and there was a photo taken by the Austin Chronicle that ended up kind of making, it was every Austin FC announcement that happened, that photo ended up getting put on everything. And some enterprising spirit in Italy took that photo and made a mouse pad out of it and started selling it on Amazon. And so I actually bought, I'm showing Alexi on the camera here, those of you who are listening, but it's a mouse pad of myself at the Austin FC announcement. It's just
awesome.
Weirdest thing I've ever found on the internet. So I had to buy myself one, but that's That's I think about that day every day because of this mouse pad. But,
Wow. Well, it was so much fun to, kind of talk to you guys and to everybody there and to see all the different pathways that led everybody to that moment, and all the different diverse type of pathways that ultimately, and I guess that's what makes it such a unique city and such a unique culture there. And that was on display. Absolutely. Like I said, from someone from the outside, it became very, very apparent very, very quickly, the unique aspect of this. And look, that's not to downplay or to poo-poo anything that's going on anywhere else. They all take on a life of their own, like I said, and they all take on that character and that personality. And it was very, very clear to me what that character and personality was of Austin. And they've just kind of kicked on in everything that's been done. I think they've done a really, really good job in the rollout over the last couple of years. Obviously we talked about the infrastructure in the stadium, and we'll talk a little bit about the players, but they haven't kicked a ball yet. And yet I think they've done a really, really good job of becoming relevant. And I use that word a lot because it's so important. And you only get, one chance for that first impression. And whether it's the introduction of the brand a couple of years ago, whether it's the stadium, obviously, whether it's the team, all of those things are to come. But so far, so good.
So looking back at the 2 years since then, and kind of the roster build that's taken place over the last several months, what is your impression of the roster build so far? And then do you have any predictions about what they'll do with those remaining 2 designated player slots?
Yeah, I mean, so look, everybody will tell you that there is a kind of a template and a roadmap, and there is. You'd be dumb, and Claudio and company would be dumb not to look at what others have done, and to recognize that you can pick and choose. And if you try to go your own way, and we've seen some of that happen, it can very, very quickly come back to bite you. And it goes back to what I said, where you only get that, that one chance at making that first impression. MLS, more than any league in the world, bends over backwards to enable you to be competitive right off the bat. And for expansion teams, with the money that you get with that knowledge, and the best practices that have come before. So, for example, Walker Zimmerman to Nashville. That was strategic. And even at the time, people were screaming, yelling about the money. And a lot of people will talk about building up the spine. And I know, the Matt Besler is not a Walker Zimmerman type of signing, but there's still MLS experience. And you look at a team like Nashville and the way that was built. And look, that's not the be all and end all, but they did a good job of at least being competitive. And for any expansion team, that is the first order of business: be competitive. Now, there's others that come in and say, we're not just going to be competitive, we're going to be competitive for MLS Cup. And there's others that say, this is going to be a slow type of growth, and we want to at least make sure that each and every time that people come out and watch us play, we will be competitive in a league that, like I said, bends over backwards to make you competitive. So, when I look at these from a goalkeeper's perspective, no one's going to jump off the page as to this is a game changer, but that's okay. You get solid MLS goalkeepers, not really starters necessarily, and so you might want to upgrade there. We talked a little bit about Matt Besler, Sweat, Lima. These are guys with the MLS experience. They understand exactly what the league is about. They also understand what the league has been about over the last year, and it's going to continue whether we like it or not for a little bit here. So that's important. The Alex Ring signing, I think, was really important. Maybe that's the Walker Zimmerman type of signing that they had. Diego Fagundes, I mean, look, who knows what he is? He's played 10 years in the league. He's been around since he's a teenager, and yet he hasn't taken that next step that I think a lot of people thought he was going to take. And maybe he just needs a change of scenery. Maybe you find a way to make him have him with that next step. Danny Hosen's a guy that had a good year and was a good MLS type of goal scorer. Can he refine some of that type of thing? But you mentioned the DP. I don't know a whole lot about Cecilio. And your DPs have to show up. We saw it time and time again, especially in the playoffs here. The money that you spent has to be used wisely, and your DPs have to show up. And they got room to do some other things, and I'm sure they're going to do some things. But so far, so good in that I can look at this foundation here and see a team that can at least be competitive.
Cool. I want to talk a little about the business side of things, which you touched on. So it seems like from our perspective that they've done the stadium's gone well. They've, from the Austin side of things, it seems like they've done everything right in terms of building that out and building local excitement and building sponsorships up and stuff like that. But what does that look like from sort of the outside what perspectives do y'all have? Both from the sponsorship side and then just like the front office build and the construction of the whole system.
It was interesting because my son got a Yeti. What did he get? He got a Yeti, something made by Yeti, and because that's the sponsor, right? That's the jersey sponsor,
jersey.
right? I think the way that they rolled that out and what that company is, and look, I know it's ultimately comes down to a lot of times to money, but the relationships and the partnerships, they call them corporate partnerships for a reason, because you do want somebody that believes in what you're doing and that you likewise look at that company and say, this is a company that we can be affiliated with and have that partnership to grow so that they're going to help our business and we're going to help their business. So I think that was a really interesting type of partnership there and what they want to do. And specifically people that want to grow their company and make money, but they want to do it through soccer, and they see that as an interesting way to get in and to make something available to a whole new market maybe for people. So that was interesting. The stadium, look, there's stadium porn, and I show I look at what's going on, and that roof, and as it's gone on, and the drone shots, all of that kind of stuff is wonderful. You can just force feed. I don't have to force feed it. I'll just open up and you can give me as much of that as possible. So that's really, really cool, because that's going to be kind of that cathedral and that temple and that place where everybody goes when we can all get back and get together and be in that communal type of setting. So, that's really important. Ticket sales seem to be going well. I don't know enough about the day in and day out business that's going on, but look, there's a reason why Anthony Precourt wanted to be in this city. And certainly he felt that from a business perspective, this was a team that could function and could function at a much higher level, and that he could tap into, the emerging or the existing corporate culture that exists there to give them something different in terms of the money that they spend and the marketing dollars that they spend.
So you spent at least some time in Austin, so I think you probably have a decent feel for just kind of the general vibe of the city, which is like a laid back, just kind of hip place, right? So there's still been kind of a push from some national MLS pundits for Austin FC to kind of like lean into this villain character that some people want us to play. And I think we may have even touched on this last year when we spoke, but it, like, for people in Austin, playing the villain just feels so unnatural. And I know that there's going to be some MLS fans who are always going to see us that way. But as far as like us being that character, like how do you see that? And do you think that that's something that that has changed over the last year or so, as far as like Austin being the villain?
I mean, I don't necessarily, and you would know better than me, but I don't necessarily see you being the villain to everybody. I see you being the villain to Columbus, and that's kind of tailor-made, and there's nothing you can do about that. And actually, I think you do embrace it, and you go for it. We all know the history, and there's nothing you can do about that. It was decisions that were made, and there are repercussions for decisions that are made, and you make lemonade out of lemons and do something like that. But you're going to have some people out there when it just comes to general other MLS teams, but I don't think they are going to cast you as the villain. And how long are you going to be held responsible for, I don't know, I guess the sins of the father or whatever, the way that we can look at it right now. I don't necessarily see that. So I think that'll go away. There's like I said, there's an immediate rivalry with Columbus, but I don't see you as the team or supporters of the team getting any more or less flack from anybody else or getting booed when you walk into the stadium based on a history. Let's be honest. Most of the people going to the game aren't going to know anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are like some like diehard MLS fans that, although they have no real connection to Columbus, that they almost see it as like, you picked on my little brother kind of thing. And so I'm going to like stand up for them. But I think as often as you see those kinds of comments online, you see 2 or 3 others that are like, oh, I can't wait for an away day in Austin. And then on top of that, we've just gone out and signed like 2 or 3 captains from other teams and then just like all the nicest guys in the league. And so I think it's going to be depending. We'll see what the rest of the roster build looks like, but depending on what that looks like right now, it seems like kind of a hard team, like a hard group of players to hate or be mad at, really.
Yeah, I mean, and you can certainly succeed and do some good things in terms of the power of positivity and good guys out there. But you also need some bastards. You also need some people out there that are going to fight. And look, there are the the smiling assassins out there too. I mean, if you ever come across, I don't know, Diego Chara, it's the nicest guy you will ever meet, and he will, if need be, decapitate you on the soccer field. so it's different when they actually step on the field. But you want good people, you want nice people, and ultimately, I think that's more how it's going to play in town and in that community, and that's really what you want, because these are rivalries, and you don't want everybody to love you. That's I don't think that's any way for a sports team to go, and you certainly don't want other teams that you come up against gaining an advantage because they feel that you're, and look, just because you're nice doesn't mean you're soft. But if you're both nice and soft, it can be a problem.
I think we might have our own smiling assassin in training with Johan Romagna as a Colombian center back that we signed from Club Guarani. He seems like a very pleasant person, but he's a monster on the field, and he'll go through people. So I'm excited to watch him play for sure.
Nice.
Yeah, and you were talking about the stadium porn stuff, which we all love, but those guys from Columbus, they, every single post from Austin FC, even if it's like, here's an overhead, drone shot of the stadium, there's just like 20 awful replies where they give us a hard time about it. And I find a little this on Reddit because, people on Reddit will be like, well, let's not make this manufactured rivalry with Columbus. Let's like have natural rivalries with like Dallas or Houston. Like, I don't care about Dallas or Houston. Like, people from Columbus hate us, and we should like lean into that and, like appreciate that and just make it a part of who we are. I mean, at least early on.
Yeah. And look, by the way, I was just in Columbus, and congratulations to Columbus. And, I got a tour of the new stadium, and that's going to be awesome. At some point, Columbus also has to kind of move on. And Columbus kind of, because if they're constantly hearkening back, and if they're constantly, for lack of a better word, whining about the past, then it's going to get old, and people aren't going to want to listen to it, in particular, and especially because of the fact that out of all of this grew a bigger, stronger Columbus, a much healthier Columbus, and certainly a much more successful Columbus in what we've seen recently, that's going to move into an incredible stadium with ownership that obviously believes in that area. So, if you have all of that, by the way, something that a lot of other teams out there would love to have, if you have all of that, and that you're still complaining and whining about something that happened, I get it, because it was to them very personal and obviously very serious to them. But at some point, you also have to move on and be thankful for what you have, and this, the strange silver lining that appeared, not golden lining for that matter, in terms of what ultimately happened. It wasn't by design, but ultimately it happened, and I think everybody ultimately got what they wanted.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I want to shift to something that is, I think, something you're very passionate about, and that's just American talent in general. And I was listening to the last episode of your podcast and talked about, y'all talked about how that perception has really changed, around the value of American players in Europe. Particularly, and it seems like that's accelerated recently. And so I just wanted to give you just a few minutes to kind of talk about that. And if you see that trend continuing on this value of American players in the world market that hasn't really been true for a long time.
Yeah, I think that Major League Soccer, we were talking earlier about the business component, and maybe more so than any league or sport out there, fans, we care about the business, and we are knowledgeable about the business. And, it comes from the fact that we don't know if the business is going to be around. But when I think about the business of American players and domestic players and selling them, and I mentioned Don Garber, the league really made a decision that they wanted to be involved in this market, and they have been. And I think that this is wonderful. But I often talk about our insecurity as a soccer playing nation and our inferiority complex that we have, and it manifests in so many different ways. This is a good time for American soccer, and we should be incredibly proud. What I think is happening is that finally the world is catching up to what the reality has been all along that we have known, is that there's a lot of good talent here, okay, at different levels. And that talent is affordable. That talent isn't going to cause you problems off the field. That talent is hungry, and that there is a market that is willing and able to do the deals and to give you, because you're just hedging your bets. You're trying to hedge your bets. And I think that the credibility of the individual clubs and of the league and of the sport has grown. And so you're seeing teams that are going back to the well a couple of times. We talk about what's going on in Dallas, for example, even in Philadelphia. So yeah, I mean, I'm incredibly bullish about the future when it comes to more American talent. The interesting thing and the trick now is going to be, as this continues to happen, is at what point does MLS start to recognize and feel the need to start retaining some of this talent? Because if you're going to be the league of choice, to use Don Garber's words, you have to also be the league of choice from domestic talent. And you have to give players a reason to want to stay and play in Major League Soccer. And a lot of that reason has to do with money. Not all of it, but a lot of it has to do with money. And so they're going to start to pick and choose as to how they go about doing that, as the ability to play with that market and to be part of that market increases, and the value of these players continue to increase. And they're going to have to drive some hard bargains too. You can't just give them away for nothing going forward. But right now it's great. I love the fact that all the players are doing so well at some really big clubs and some really big leagues. But like I said, I think we've had talent all along. I think it's more acceptable now to sign American talent. I think it's easier now to sign American talent. But I think the characteristics and the attributes of the American player, I don't think they've changed a whole lot, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, I think just mentioning like the world waking up to what's available in the U.S., I think someone like Weston McKennie could never play another game and would still have been one of the most influential people on American soccer, and kind of like being an ambassador for the talent that exists in America, and people trusting that they can buy a player like that on one of the biggest teams in the world and play them. Just like what he's done for that, I think is huge. And just I think you're definitely right that that's something that teams are realizing now, and that they're going to go back to that well over and over now.
But what will be interesting is, you mentioned Weston McKennie, and obviously Weston McKennie, even though he started in Major League Soccer in terms of development, he never actually played in Major League Soccer. If Weston McKennie had continued to go on and to play in Major League Soccer, he may still be the same quality, talented player. But the way that not only he's viewed maybe from the outside, but the way that we view him from the inside would be very, very different. And that's the job, and that's the challenge of Major League Soccer, is to be able to change those hearts and minds, both internally and externally, so that when this talent is being assessed, it's not downgraded simply because it plays in MLS, and that the credibility and obviously the value is seen, not just by the people that want to buy that talent, but also by the people internally that are looking at it and saying, look, that player that plays at Juventus is a great American player, all right? And that player that plays for Austin or plays for Dallas or plays for New York or anybody else, that's a good player too. They're just playing in different leagues, and that's always been things that I've thought about, is how do we start changing the perspective, and how do we start winning those hearts and minds, not just of people overseas, because I think we're starting to do that, but also of people here in the United States and in Canada.
Yeah, I have another question that's a little bit off topic,
Sure.
but we were talking to some friends of ours, told them we were going to interview you, and we said, well, what should we ask Alexi? And obviously a lot of the questions were soccer questions, but your love of Rat came up. Well, your love of hair metal and your love of Rat. So can you explain to us what is it about Rat that makes him like uniquely your favorite?
So we don't pick our favorite bands; they often pick us. They're kind of like children, right? So Rat, for those that don't know, it's spelled R-A-T-T, and it's a successful 80s metal band, hair metal, however you want to define it genre wise. And oftentimes your favorite bands hit you at a moment when you are often open to being impacted. And so it hit me at the perfect moment. I was 12, 13 years old. I vividly remember, it was at the start of MTV. And so you saw the video, and in my little suburban existence in Detroit, and them with this, Sunset Strip type of hedonistic existence, it was everything that I was not. And I loved it. I loved the sound. I loved the look, the brand, all of that kind of stuff. And so it hit me at a time, and, I'm 50 years old right now, and I still will tell anybody that Rat is my favorite band. Now, look, the spectrum of music that I listen to is all over the place, but yes. And, there's a whole generation now that has no idea who Rat is, or they maybe saw them in the Geico commercial or something like that. But it's, we don't pick them. They pick us. And there's something, like I said, both the audio part and the visual part that planted that seed, and it grew and grew and grew, and it's never left me.
So they came a little bit later, but for my wife, that band is Skid Row.
Oh, of course.
She loves that. And when I think Sebastian Bach did a tour, it was the Bring 'Em Bach Alive tour.
Oh,
like 20 years later, and we had to go see him, and she was like she was 14 again. It was amazing.
Sebastian Bach, one of the great voices in metal and hard rock over the years. I remember Sebastian Bach once came to a Metro Stars game. I was playing for the New York Metro Stars back, and so, I got to meet him and tell him how, influential and how much I loved it. I mean, not just the first album, but Slaves to the Grind is just still one of the great metal albums. And what an incredible evolution and growth from first album to second album. Anyway, I digress a little bit. I remember being out I went to see Sebastian play at a club in New York City, and Ace Frehley was there, and it was just like I was in absolute heaven hanging out. And Sebastian Bach's like 6'5". I mean, and with the hair probably 6'6" back then. But oh my God, the Skid Row impact and all of those different bands, they're oft maligned because of the aesthetic and everything, but the musicianship, when it comes to the players that they had, the songwriting, the production, all of that kind of stuff, it got blown out when grunge came through. But I think if you look at, like I said, the talent and the way that those songs were produced, it bears a second look and maybe even a third look.
I really dislike most hair metal music, but I'm not gonna talk too much trash, because when I was like 12 or 13, I was listening to a lot of Limp Bizkit and Linkin Park, and so I don't think I have much room to criticize anybody there. But.
Hey, listen, but and it's all over. Like I said, it's all over the spectrum. So I would be listening to Rat over here, and then I would put on Air Supply or Zeppelin over here, and then I'd put on Kajagoogoo and Duran Duran over here, or AC/DC and Skid Row over here, and then I'd be listening to the Indigo Girls or John Cougar, John Mellencamp, and Tom Petty. So it was all over the map when it came to music. And so it's like I said, it's timing. Especially when you're in your teens, and it's so formative in everything, and the relationships you have, and the bands that you have, and I don't know and I sound like a grumpy old guy here, but I don't know that people necessarily have those connections and that bond that we used to have with music and musicians and bands and albums that came out and all that kind of stuff in the streaming and the single world that we now live on. But maybe it's more, actually, to be honest, maybe it's much more that type of old school traditional type connection is much more involved when it comes to our sports and our teams and stuff like that. So who knows? And they're brands in and of themselves.
Before we wrap up here, I just want to thank you again. You're always very generous with your time, and it's very obvious you're someone who loves American soccer and want it to grow and to be the best that it can be. And I'm always very very grateful for the time that you spend promoting that kind of stuff on podcasts like this, where you don't have to take the time to do it. Like, you don't have to take this time to come be on our show, but you always do it, and you're always very gracious with your time. So thank you for that. And
that's very kind.
before we finish up,
I just let me say, but because I can't let that compliment go. I guess I don't have to do it, but I want to do it. I mean, I love this. I love talking about the game that I love, especially in the country and the countries when it comes to Major League Soccer that I love. And you guys, what you are doing is as important as anybody that's kicking a ball, because this is La Cosa Nostra. This is all our thing, and we're doing this and we're growing this. And look, I know, I have my opinions, and people agree and they disagree and they vehemently disagree and they call me names at different times too. But the reality is that ultimately this is a family. It's a growing family. And families are like that. We're dysfunctional. We scream and yell at each other. But also when people from the outside try to come in, we can be very protective, and we want to make sure that tent is as open and inclusive as possible. And we're bringing as many people in as we possibly can. And so whether it's you guys doing that or anybody kicking a ball, whether it's an old guy like me or a new person coming up, it's all about this game and growing this game. And it's a wonderful game. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I'm as my 50 years, the things that I've learned, I think that you're going to discover things about the game through this team that you didn't even realize. And that's a good thing, because I think it's going to give you a whole nother way of looking at the game and a whole different color pattern of the game in the way that you look at it on the field and off the field. And that ownership that I saw from the first day that I was there, I think it's only going to grow stronger and stronger. And you're going to bring more people into the tent, even people that don't even know a whole lot about soccer. And you got to embrace them, and you got to make sure that they feel that this is something for them and that they can learn and that they are part of that family. And the last thing in the world that we ever want to do is to put up any type of barriers to entry when it comes to soccer.
Yeah, you may have just covered it all, but I was going to see if you had any other parting thoughts for Austin FC fans as we enter this inaugural season. So are there anything else you want to add to what you just mentioned?
No, I mean, I will say that you should, for lack of a better word, you should demand that your team be competitive. I think it's really easy when a team comes in to just say, well, we're new and we're just trying to figure it out. And yes, this is a growth type of process, and you're going to get better and better. But this is also a competitive environment, and competitive on the field with what's going on, competitive off the field with the environment that you are creating around, not just in the stadium, but in the city. And you're going to have visitors. And you should want to be successful, and you should, I'm going to use it, demand to, at the very least, like I say, be competitive. Because, I'll reiterate one more time, no league in the world allows you to be competitive faster and easier than MLS. It's by design. It's manufactured parity. We understand that. And there are some separations going on, but this league, you should expect to be competitive and not be embarrassed ultimately by the product that you're putting out there on the field. And look, I'm going to call it like it is. So if you're good, you're good. If I feel you're going to be good, I'll say you're going to be good. But if you're bad, you're bad. And it's okay. It doesn't mean I don't like you. It doesn't mean I don't like Austin. It's not a wonderful place. And doesn't mean that I'm not going to keep going back there. But you know what my job is. So that's what we're going to do going forward. But there's going to be a lot of great moments that have nothing directly to do with actually winning or losing and kicking the ball on the field. But, that's where it all stems from. And there's a whole lot of other stuff that comes with it.
Well, thanks so much for joining us again, Alexi. Hopefully one day soon we can all be in a stadium watching some soccer and having beers together.
Amen. Amen.
Until that time
you guys
comes,
like to drink down there. So,
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. And until that time comes, though, I hope you and yours stay safe and sane, and we'll hopefully see you soon.
Thank you.
Well, you don't need words to tell me things that drive me wild.
All right, we want to thank Alexi one more time for coming on and sharing some of his time with us. We'd like to remind you to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We also want to remind you to visit capitalcitysoccer.com, where Troy Bryant and Zach Mason bring you the latest in Austin FC news, including an article that Jeremiah wants to tell you about.
Yeah, so they wrote a very good overview of Matt Besler's signing and arrival in Austin FC, and actually the video that we talked about early in the show is linked in that article. If you have not had the chance to watch that video yet, we'll put that article in the show notes, and you can check it out there.
Next week, we're going to take a kind of a deep dive look into the MLS Super Draft, and we're going to be joined by Travis Clark of Top Drawer Soccer, who's kind of an expert on that field of American soccer as far as youth and college ranks go. So we're really excited to kind of pick his brain on the Super Draft. Until then, my name is Landon Cottom.
I'm Jeremiah Bentley.
We'll catch you next time.
No one is around.